For coming. Apologies for the late start. I'll quickly do my introductory statement, and then you've got quite a team of people that you can interrogate at will. Pakistan and India, as you all know, went through 5 days of war. The way we've achieved a ceasefire, we've appreciated the international community's role in achieving the ceasefire. But we believe the ceasefire led to a false sense of calm, a belief that things are back to normal. But what the reality of the situation is that we in the region, and by extension, the international community, is actually less safe today than they were at the start of this conflict. The new normal, or the new abnormal that India would like to impose on the region is that if there's a terrorist attack anywhere in India or India-occupied Kashmir, proof or no proof, that immediately means war. As you recall, at the start of this conflict, immediately after, before the start of this conflict, immediately after the terrorist attack in Indian-occupied Kashmir, the Prime Minister of Pakistan offered an impartial international inquiry into the incident that Pakistan would be willing to be a part of, with no conditions on who should be part of it, who should not be part of it. All of those things were left open to discussion. Immediately, that proposal was shot down. India proceeded to, with their own words, hold in abeyance the Indus Water Treaty, which is not allowed for within the treaty, within international law. They threatened to cut off the water supply for 240 million Pakistanis. This threat in itself is a war crime. If they were to act on this threat for Pakistan, it would be a matter of survival. It would turn this to an existential crisis, and we would be left with no choice but to embark on the first water war, and not the first water war at least between two nuclear-armed states. Pakistan has demonstrated throughout this conflict that we are not the aggressors. We showed self-restraint at every opportunity, have called for investigation, have called for dialogue, have called for dialogue and diplomacy in the pursuit of peace, and have maintained the importance of abiding by international law. We are here in Europe, but we're very cognizant of the fact that Europe feels passionately about war, not only because of your history, but because of what you're facing today, the first war on the European continent since World War II. If international law applies in Europe, then it should apply in South Asia. If treaties are respected here, then only they can be respected in our part of the world. So we understand where you're coming from, but we want to convey to you that as it stands at the moment, in our part of the world, the last edifice of cooperation between our two states, India and Pakistan, everything else has been talked about. The last thing that remained, the Indus Water Treaty, that too, India wants to depart from. If people far away think things that are far away from us don't apply to us, this is none of our business. They couldn't be more wrong. The threshold being so low means that the drop of a hat, we could go to war again. This particular terrorist attack within Indian-occupied Kashmir had no connection to Pakistan. To this day, they haven't been able to share with their own public, with their allies, and certainly haven't shared with us the names, identities of the individuals involved in this terrorist attack. Nor can they even share with us who they have targeted in their so-called targeted operation within Pakistan. We can point to the civilian infrastructure, the dam that they targeted, the facilities that they targeted, and the innocent civilians they killed. They can't name one terrorist that was involved in this terrorist attack that supposedly crossed this heavily armed border between India and Pakistan. Nor can they name a single terrorist that they attacked and killed on Pakistani soil when they violated our sovereignty. We appreciate the role the international community played in helping us achieve this ceasefire. We now look to the international community to engage with India and convince them that the decisions that they have made leave not only us less safe, but leave everybody less safe. There's no military solution to Kashmir. There's no military solution to terrorism, the water issue. Water isn't even and should never be considered a weapon of conflict. I'm cognizant of the fact that we commenced late, that there's so many people over here that will have many questions, not only for me, but also for the other members of our delegation. I would suggest that if there are climate-related questions, we've got two fantastic climate representatives here. Otherwise, you can either ask me or anybody else sitting before you, and I'll hand it over to our ambassador to moderate our session.
Thank you very much, sir. Could you kindly identify yourself and the question when asking the question, please? We'll begin from, what, ladies first?
Okay. Well, Lynn Gutas from the European Institute for Asian Studies. We already had a discussion this morning on specifically on climate change. But of course, to what extent is that we already tackled briefly about the Indus Water Treaty. So, but how is this actually going? How are you going to address this in the future? I mean, how are you going to make sure that India does not depart from it? And what can we do? Because of course, the climate, also on climate, this will have an issue, so as well as on the water.
I'd actually like to bifurcate the two, and on the climate question, I'll ask Sherry or Sadiq to step in. But on the Indus Water Treaty, we've laid out the stark situation before. As far as the Indus Water Treaty is concerned, this is the gold standard in diplomacy. Our treaty has been replicated in 40 other treaties dealing with water. It has withstood war after war. It has dispute resolution mechanisms with it. There's no space within international law, and there's no space within this treaty for any party to unilaterally depart or make any unilateral decisions. All decisions are to be made through mutual consent. Even if we were to renegotiate, Pakistan never shut the door to, only asked, what would you like to negotiate? But even if we were to renegotiate a treaty, until we were to come to a conclusion in that renegotiation, this treaty would stand. As it is through this treaty that we came up with a unique solution. Rather than relying simply on lower riparian rights, which would have given us lower riparian rights to all 3 rivers, all 6 rivers, sorry. Pakistan and India agreed through this treaty to divide the river systems. 3 rivers were given in total to India, and 3 rivers, there's certain rights to the Indian government, but the majority is for Pakistan, and that we rely 100% for our water from these remaining rivers. The 3 rivers that they are in their control, they have control of the headworks through which they can and have been since they made this announcement, either delaying the release of our water or in times of excess, releasing an excess of water. Just a delay of a few days has devastating consequences for our crops. And it means that not only our agriculture is affected, on a humanitarian level, this is the only water supply to Pakistan. In the climate context, we're already the largest collection of snow and ice was in this region. The last thing we needed was a fault line, conflict to develop. This should have been an avenue for cooperation. Climate Minister and former Climate Minister will give you sort of a little bit more detail about the challenge we face vis-a-vis climate. It's a stark reality that we're facing before we drew this fault line exactly where it need to be.
Thank you. So I'd only say that, look, if this treaty is in abeyance, then no treaty post-Second World War is worth the piece of paper on which it's printed. Because then any country in the world can now pull out of treaties because this entire rule-based regime is gone. If it doesn't suit me, I pull out tomorrow. So all the war treaties, all the peace treaties, all the developmental treaties, all the Marshall Plan, they don't mean jack. It's all gone. Because if you're going to allow for one country to pull out of a treaty, a signed treaty, then no country has to abide by any treaty, number one. Number two, all lower riparian countries, they will have to retire their right to water. Because this basically means any upper riparian country has a legitimate right, just because by accident of geography, just because they are higher riparian, that means they can choke the water of the lower riparians all across the world, not just in Pakistan. So this precedent set has implications for Latin America, for South America, for Africa. And what are we going to do about it? I mean, are we going to actually allow for the upper riparian countries to tell the lower riparian countries, boom, you're now going to have food security, you're not going to have food? So for us, we're going to lobby. We're going to lobby with the rest of the world which is lower riparian. It's not just about us. It's about the rights of every single country, Europeans included, who are lower riparian, because you're establishing a new regime of rights which is differential with upper riparian countries. So that's kind of our second point. The third is, what are you attacking? Are you... Yes. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I go overboard. This man is a very, very good checker. Look, it's not just that the water that flows. What flows with the water is a civilization. What flows with this water is climate. We have 13,000 glaciers, 13,000 glaciers. We are having the highest bluffs across the world right now. We're having these glaciers burst into lakes. And when they come down, they bring down boulders half the size of this room from 35,000 feet, which basically devastate all civilization that lies underneath. So it's not just water. This control, this release, this flooding, this devastation is of enormous consequences. So I'll pause here because my friend Sherry is going to then also write me another chip.
Thank you, Chairman. Just very quickly, I think this does amount to an existential attack on our water security as well as our food security. So climate impacts both of, the water cutoff impacts both of these. The Indus River, which we're talking about, is the lifeline of the country. It is the only basin that feeds and supplies Pakistan with livelihoods, crops, and all sorts. All of its cities are clustered around the Indus except one. So it is the defining lifeline of the Indus Valley civilization, our geopolitical entity, as well as India. We share a river basin with India, which is larger than the size of UK. It's larger. So we are already water stressed because the groundwater is gone, which means water that is under the surface. The treaty governs just the surface water, which they have been siphoning off for many years in their constructions. However, I think it's important to understand that food and water security are a crisis for many parts of both India and Pakistan. Already Pakistan's soil, at least in the southern area, the province I'm from, is under severe water stress. The other province is under severe water scarcity. Scarcity and stress are two different things. And by cutting off the water, as you have less and less water and more constructions, illegal constructions on the upper side of a transboundary river, what you have is a situation where the water stops flowing to the sea. Without water flowing to the sea, one of the breadbaskets of the country, which is the province of Sindh, where I'm from, becomes saline. The soil starts waterlogging, the sea starts ingressing. So nature and the sea abhor a vacuum. As the water stops coming down in certain seasons, the sea makes ingress. That soil becomes infertile. It is impossible to sow over there. And I'm sorry to be a little, detailed on this, but desalination and waterlogging is a very serious problem. It is because of water scarcity and constructions and canals on the upper riparian systems here. it's a crucial competition in the region. Water is now going to be the conflict, but our issue was not to politicize it, not to make it a flashpoint for a potential nuclear war, because as my two senior colleagues have said, the chairman repeatedly says it will become a flashpoint for war, and particularly nuclear war, because the standoff weapons that were used by India can amount to that, they're dual use, and the escalatory ladder gets very high. So water is what the new fight should not ever have been. Food, water, human migrations, this will result in larger migrations, larger land hunger, which is already higher than us, than India, but they have a lot more population, they have a lot more of everything. So that is where we are standing. Our soil is, two of our provinces, Balochistan and Sindh, that's half the country, are completely degraded already, more or less. 1/3 of Sindh is left to sow and cultivate, the rest is no longer able to use because there's no groundwater left. Nobody's talking about that. Please check how much mining India does of this basin, and it is the largest miner of groundwater in the world. We are left with no water for our irrigation and our tube wells. So I'm going to stop there because you may have other geopolitical questions.
Thank you very much. Next question, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for your presentation and for your invitation for this meeting. My name is Juliana and I'm from the Portuguese mission to the EU. So taking into account what you have just shared, I would like to know what's your plan, what's your approach within your mandate in the United Nations for dealing with this link between security and environment, climate change.
Thank you. As far as what's our plan, we're here participating in that part of the plan. We are seeking the assistance of the international community in helping us achieve peace in the subcontinent so that we don't have to fight either on Kashmir or on terrorism or even on water. And we can collectively, with India, face the challenge of climate change. Just as was just laid out, we face severe challenges, but these are joint challenges that we should have been meeting together. Within the context of the Indus Water Treaty, we, as far as the United Nations is concerned, I believe the United Nations Security Council is holding a debate next month on the respect for treaties. I think that will be incredibly important in the context of what we're seeing in the subcontinent. And then our options are, we're being forced towards very limited options. India said no to an impartial investigation into terrorism, no to the United Nations Security Council's role in dispute mechanism resolution, no to the United Nations to dispute resolution mechanism, no to President Trump's or the international community's offers to mediate, and no to bilateral dialogue with Pakistan. So in that context, we've lowered the threshold for conflict between our two countries. We've rose so fast through the escalation ladder the last time round that the next time round is going to start off where we left off. And we're not talking to each other. So if they continue on the threats that they've made, and just the mere threat is a violation of the UN Charter to cut off the water supply of any country, you can't claim to just be against terrorists if you're shutting off the water supply of a whole country. You can't claim to just be against terrorists when you call an entire country terrorist-stan. That means there is no distinction between civilians and terrorists as far as our opponents or our neighbors are concerned. So that with all those doors shut off, we continue to pursue the path of peace. We insist on dialogue and diplomacy is the only solution. We do not crave conflict. But if India is going to dam the water supply of Pakistan, carve out canals for the water supply of Pakistan, then Pakistan would have no peaceful resolution option available. It'll become a matter of survival and we'll have to go to war.
Eliana, you'll have to join your voice with us because you should have empathy for us. You know exactly what we're talking about.
Thank you. next, anybody who wants to ask questions, it doesn't need to go in any order. It can go in any order, but it's just anybody who feels.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the invitation. Ralph Knetzke from the International Center for Migration Policy Development, ICMPD. We work with your authorities in the country, but my question is not about migration actually.
Okay.
It's clear it could be a consequence of what was described. My question is actually now you refer to the international community, while we are in Brussels. Could you be a bit more specific, possibly, what you expect from the European Union? And what you think realistically the European Union, which role it could play in the efforts of the international community, taking into account that sometimes it's the European Union, what is it? Is it strong? Is it weak? It's far away, given the current shake-up order as well. Yeah, what do you?
It's a very, very valid question. We're very encouraged by everywhere we've gone and the keenness with which people would like this dispute to be resolved through dialogue and diplomacy. And given the European Union's stance on international law, stance on respecting the UN Charter, stance on the respect for treaties, stance on not denying food or water to civilian populations anywhere in the world, stance on the importance of UN Security Council resolutions and the UN Charter. I think that there's a lot that the European Union can do. And I've been reminding, this is not sort of specifically for you, but it has been a constant refrain wherever we have gone. Where we've quoted the fact that all it takes for evil to succeed is for good men to do nothing. And I don't believe, luckily, that anyone is ready to do nothing in this conflict. The Europeans are not only talking to us, they have been talking to the Indians, and they're also encouraging dialogue and diplomacy is the only avenue, the only pathway forward to solve this conflict. We note even with the Indian foreign minister standing right next to your commissioner, she still insisted in messaging the importance of international law, condoling with the loss of lives on both sides. So we appreciate these subtle messages. We appreciate the efforts for de-escalation in the run-up to the ceasefire and the continued efforts to encourage dialogue in pursuit of peace. Would we look for those who, for what we ideally like to see, is for us to be able to depart from this sort of false binary that has been created post this conflict, where all of a sudden, in the interest of being neutral arbiters, when India isn't interested in anyone being an arbiter, but in the interest of being neutral stakeholders, suddenly peace is partisan, dialogue is partisan, the respective treaties, or at least voicing the importance of the respective treaties is partisan, and speaking against the weaponization of water is partisan. But I leave it to the specific individuals involved, the institutions involved, the countries involved to assess what best serves our goal. Our goal is not to sort of provoke activism. Our goal is to induce results. So whatever the best approach is, to speak to your friend India as a friend, to encourage them that dialogue and diplomacy is the way forward. That the caricature that they paint for Pakistan is not the same experience that at least the Americans or the British or anybody else had. Those all would be positive developments. We don't expect to achieve peace in a day, but we're encouraged by everyone's willingness to play whatever role they can in facilitating that process.
Thank you. There's many questions to ask. I'm a retired journalist working on the
Journalists ever retire?
Journalists do retire, but then they remain active. So we can never escape the profession. Now there's many questions that I would ask. One is, you said we need a solution to Jammu and Kashmir. What is your proposal to make a step forward on this question that has been bugging South Asia for more than 75 years? Second, India cannot just turn off the tap. And the water scarcity that the minister was referring to is predating the abeyance. So there's already a problem. How do you see what, or let me put it more specifically, what happened or what did you measure happening after India said that it put the treaty in abeyance? Is there a real difference today as compared to, say, 2 months ago? And then third, somebody has to ask the difficult question, is there anything that the Pakistani government is planning to do to get rid of militant outfits that are so convenient for India to blame Pakistan as a terrorist state?
Thank you for the opportunity to answer all these questions. These exactly the topics that you mentioned are those that we believe that can come up within the context of a comprehensive dialogue with India. If we have a comprehensive dialogue, that means an all-encompassing dialogue. And that gives us an opportunity to discuss all each issues, at least bilaterally. As far as the question of Kashmir, given that you're an expert, you know Pakistan's long-standing position is in line with the UN Security Council resolutions and in accordance to international law. Only once we deliver the plebiscite to the people of Kashmir, their right to self-determination, would be our position. India would bring their position as part of a comprehensive dialogue. But I believe there are dueling reasons now that we must address the issue of Kashmir. If India thought that this was an internal issue, they have ensured that this never remains an internal issue. Not only because of the multilateral politics and the commitments to international law and what does the United Nations mean if we can decide that we're not going to apply whatever is inconvenient to us. Not least the promise that we in the international community has made to the people of Kashmir, not least because this is a legacy of partition left over by the colonial powers that still bleeds to this day, has led to wars in the past, and is providing the groundwork for the wars between us, India and Pakistan, even to this day. As far as indigenous terrorism is a challenge within India, it has become a root cause to the indigenous terrorism that was demonstrated in this last terrorist attack, particularly post-2019, where the policies of the state have become even more aggressive, repressive, and suppressive. They've moved away from their domestic commitments to the people of Kashmir. In that circumstance, what you're doing is you're creating the perfect environment to breed indigenous terrorism, and that indigenous terrorism will challenge India in a way that no cross-border terrorism ever could. And instead of addressing this issue, we're ignoring the issue and making it worse. If we don't find a solution for Kashmir, and the situation on the ground continues to deteriorate, then the environment is created and the new youth in Kashmir will form the cannon fodder for the terrorist organizations of tomorrow that will continue to perpetuate these attacks. Before I go into the water, I'd like to sidestep onto the terrorist question. As far as what Pakistan has done, now the militant groups that exist on Pakistani soil are a result of the Cold War politics and the geopolitics of the 1980s. Every single group that you can name today, every single one, there's not one that's out of this orbit. Be it Al-Qaeda, be it the Taliban, be it these groups that are of concern to the Indian government. That's the groups of concern to the Indian government. All of them are a result, are the hangover, are the leftover elements of the Afghan jihad ecosystem in Afghan 1. That decision to set up this network of what was called at the time freedom fighters, who were dubbed at the time as the great Mujahideen, fighting the moral war of the West against the evil Satan. Evil Satan then was the Soviet Union. These were the same people who were invited to the White House by Ronald Reagan, and he declared that these are the moral equivalent to our founding fathers. And Pakistan, well, at the time was under a dictatorship, and my mother, Benazir Bhutto, was leading the resistance against the dictatorship. Even at that time, She wants the Pakistani authorities and the international community that you're creating a Frankenstein monster that's going to come back and haunt us. And that Frankenstein monster came back and haunted the US at 9/11, well, the entire world. Pakistan is part of the international coalition, targeted Al-Qaeda, targeted the Taliban. Well, now the Taliban is off the list, God knows what the definition is over there. Targeted other organizations, reoriented our entire infrastructure of our state to treat some groups which we previously considered as allies as now terrorist organizations. That reorientation was a difficult and bloody process. The political leadership of the country across the board have now developed a consensus, but this consensus wasn't always there. We fought politically against these terrorists on the political battlefield by challenging them politically, and resulted in losing our lives, changing the state policy on the political front. The military leadership of Pakistan is not again the caricature that the world wants to paint of many, many generations ago, where there would have been conflict in this transition, where there would have been anti-Al-Qaeda as a result of 9/11 and their alliances in the world. But when you got down to the officers and the individuals who fought the wars alongside, who used to be the Mujahideen, there may have been grey area. Now, the military leadership in Pakistan have come up through the ranks while combating these terrorists on the front lines. They fought them in Swat, they fought them in South Waziristan, they fought them in North Waziristan. They earned their honors in valor and in bravery while fighting these terrorists, and then got promoted to the current ranks that they are while they lead our armed forces. So in that context, we fought the bloody war over what's left over from Afghan 1. The international community, through FATF, has only recently endorsed Pakistan's actions against the groups of concern to India. So we've lived up to international scrutiny of the FATF that endorsed Pakistan's actions against the LET and other groups, and have approved the actions that Pakistan has taken. And we've gone from the grey list to the white list because they believe that those actions are worth a violin or of significance. Now, so far, I've only talked about the challenges that we face from Afghan 1. The new terrorist problem that we're facing is Afghan 2, the consequences of the fall of Kabul. And we've seen in the space of the last couple of years a significant increase in terrorist attacks within Pakistan. At this point in time, if we continue at the trajectory that the terrorist attacks are just taking place in this year, I mean, not at the end of the year yet, but if it continues at this trajectory and we get to the end of the year, then this year, 2025, will be the bloodiest year Pakistan has seen as far as terrorism is concerned. Year after year, we've been the largest victims of terrorism. So far, 92,000 lives lost. Even this year, we hold the record, the glorious record, of being the country where the single largest number of terrorist attacks are taking place and the single largest number of victims of terrorism exist. It is in this context that we passionately advocate for regional cooperation, international cooperation to combat terrorism. The US just 2 days ago called Pakistan a phenomenal partner in combating terrorism. We have managed to collectively thwart terrorist attacks within Pakistan and in capitals across the Western world as a result of Pakistan and those Western countries' close collaboration and CT efforts. Pakistan and India, since 2012, have had no collaboration on counterterrorism. The last collaboration we had was within the confines of this comprehensive dialogue that we now seek. Even in that cooperation, Pakistan shared information as far as LET is concerned and the terrorists that were going to attack their country, which resulted in India taking action against those groups. India never supported Pakistan in our concerns about the BLA and the Majid Brigade and the support that they provide for these organizations. Even now, we believe that the only way for us to secure the future of South Asia from terrorism, from the new threats that we're going to face, will ultimately be cooperation between India and Pakistan. Without talking to one another. If you even look at the 2019 attack, which is the last attack that resulted in planes in the air, between that day and this day, the April 22nd attack in Balkan, no communication, no intelligence sharing took place as far as terrorism is concerned. And finally, the fact that India cannot turn off the taps is untrue. They've turned off the taps in the past. 1948, 1949, I believe it was, they shut Pakistan's water. They have been in violation of the, we then resulted in negotiating the Indus Water Treaty, dividing our, sharing the resources. Within the mechanisms of the Indus Water Treaty, we had complaints that India was violating the Indus Water Treaty, was damming places they shouldn't dam, was building structures they shouldn't build, was building structures larger than they were allowed to under the treaty. But those cases, we were facing through the structure of this mechanism. What India has done is A, threatened to turn off the taps. And I want to repeat, just threatening to turn off the tap is a violation of the UN Charter. It's not about how much damage they have caused, just making this threat is a violation of international law. Now they implement it in two ways. One way is the extreme scenario where Pakistan has already laid out that this would be an act of war. That would be damming the rivers that are right in the corners to this treaty, carving out new canals in those three rivers. The other way that they damage us, or they turn off the taps, is you only have to delay the release of the water from the so-called tap by up to a week. 1 week's delay, or even less, would mean that our crops die. And our agriculture economy is devastated, our people is devastated, our food security has connotations of those. So, it's not about their ability or capacity to turn off the taps. This precedent should never be allowed to set. We cannot allow the weaponization of water in this way. We are seeking a new dialogue with India, where we will make new promises with one another, and potentially sign new treaties. For that process to start, they need to respect all treaties. They need to take that decision. Take us back to the position that we were before this ceasefire. Not just militarily, but also diplomatically.
I mean, if I may just ask, just add to it. How long do you think it would take to turn the tap off? How long does it take to build a dam? You'd blink, and we'd all have the answer. It takes 6 to 8 years. 2019 is when we had our skirmish. That was 6 years ago. That's how long it takes to build a dam. So when you say, have they turned the tap off? Should we wait when we are left with no water and the tap is actually turned off? So it doesn't take much to build a dam. It doesn't take much to build a canal. So the fundamental question is not have they turned the tap off, because the chairman has already answered that yes, they have. Over the past 1.5 months, they flooded and held back water when we needed it for cropping. And for the winter cropping, they're going to do it again because there's scarcity of water. And when they hold back water during winter cropping, our saplings, our seeds would die. And they only have to hold it back through the cascade of dams that they have just for about 10 days. And we'd have food security, we'd have drought. But that's not the fundamental question. The fundamental question is, when you're making policy, are you making policy for day before yesterday? We'd blink and we'd be in the 7th year. And then what are we going to do? That's basically fundamental to this dispute.
If anybody has a couple of final questions for me, then I have to step out to another interview, and I'll leave you in the very able hands of everybody else to also answer your questions. Jeez.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. This has been a very insightful afternoon. Greatly appreciate it. My name is Eric Piaget. I'm a researcher at the United Nations University in Bruges, and I'm coordinating a work package on science diplomacy at the VUB, which is part of this alliance of universities called the Utopia. But I very much admire your commitment to dialogue and diplomacy. What I was interested in knowing is, of course, the ecosystem of diplomacy is much broader than foreign ministries. There's track 1 and then track 2. The Institute of Multi-Track Diplomacy even has 9 different tracks of diplomacy: businesses, civil society, religious organization. I was just curious to know how you might envision engaging these other diplomatic actors towards your diplomatic objectives.
Sure, we can do like a quick fire round of a couple of questions and I'll go through.
Hello, Andreas Stignitz, work for the EAS. Very short question. Sorry. To which extent do you think that it is India is driven by its domestic agenda, and do you think another government in India would bring a different relationship between India and Pakistan?
Thank you. Very good question.
Michel de Kemeter, Club of Brussels. We are experts in regeneration, socioeconomic and environmental. We did an inventory of over 100 projects of greening in the deserts, in hyper-arid areas. A lot of solutions exist, and I was wondering if you have also, because the water problem is going to be worse by the year. So we can try to manage what we can manage today, but we know it's going to be worse. Solutions exist, local solutions for water management, flood captation, etc., etc. Do we have experiences like that and knowledge centers that knowledge can be shared with them, Pakistan or not? Or would you be interested to connect?
Okay, absolutely. I think that let's answer those questions. Other tracks, it takes two to tango. So someone has to agree to any level of talk before a talk can take place. At the moment, India is doggedly disagreeing because I believe they find it convenient to use for them to have a justification to not talk and then unilaterally act, whether it was in 2019, the unilateral changes that they took within the Kashmir context or in the Indus Water Treaty. But obviously we will continue to pursue that path, and we would be very keen at any level and at any way this conversation would start. I believe that a minimal improvement should be that at the moment we have DGMO to DGMO talks as far as the ceasefire implementation is concerned. The minimal elevation of that talks would be an NSA to NSA level talk, and then sort of develop it forward towards a comprehensive dialogue. As far as domestic politics, absolutely it's driven this. The only variable that has changed throughout this scenario is the domestic politics of India and the ruling government of India. Never before was water used as a weapon. Never before anyway, as far as their domestic politics is concerned, I also don't want to comment on it beyond the reasonable, I can comment on it from my concerns, but ultimately that's a decision that the Indian public has to make. It's a decision that the Indian public has made, and we in Pakistan have to deal with this reality. And the reality is that you have a new government in India, that's a Hindutva government in India, that seeks inspiration not from the Gandhian secular India, but by the RSS assassin that assassinated Gandhi. They have a completely different approach to how India should work, how the region should work. They're ideologically committed to the idea of Akhand Bharat, which means that a greater India, an imaginary India that never existed as a single entity, that exists in the minds of these Hindu extremists. And they want to impose that view of the world on the entire region. And it encompasses Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. So I'm sure people are watching what's happening with the only nuclear armed nation with trepidation. But this map of the greater India, other countries in the world have similar aspirations. This map of Akhand Bharat is on the walls of the Indian Parliament. So they've painted what they'd like to see in the region. And they use the tool that they use to achieve this is they use the wolf whistle of terrorism to demonize the Muslims in India, the Muslims in Indian occupied Kashmir, and now, by extension, the Muslims in Pakistan. And Europe knows all too well what happens when you normalize the dehumanization of a specific community anywhere in the world. They've done it, you've witnessed this in the past. They're doing it before our eyes. Obviously that has consequences. But we're saying we're willing to have dialogue with the devil in the interest of peace. We believe that India is not in its own, whatever its aspirations are, whatever its ideology is, the decisions that their leadership has made has left both sides less secure. It is not in the interest of India that we leave our fates in the hands of non-state actors and terrorists. On the one hand, every time talks have been derailed, they've been derailed because of a terrorist act. So even in those circumstances, we, the leaders of India and Pakistan, are not deciding the fate of our people. We're leaving it to the terrorists to decide that we're talking, so they'll go and do an attack and we sabotage the talk. Now we're saying that the decision to go to war will not be taken by Modi or Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. The decision to go to war between two nuclear arms nations will also be taken by nameless, faceless terrorists who decide to attack at will. This entire corner that Modi is painting his country and our region into is not in our mutual interest. To say that we have fought generation after generation over Kashmir and we will continue to fight. We will never talk. To say that we fought then after that consistently over the issue of terrorism, but still we're not to talk or to investigate. And then to add to that a new fault line and say that now we damn the future generations of Pakistan and India to fight over water. That may be a fate that Modi is willing to damn his own citizens to. It's not a fate that I want to damn my citizens to, and we hold no ill will to the people of India. We would not want to damn them to this fate either. It will be a compulsion. We'll all have to talk to one another eventually to address these issues. With the developments in our neighborhood over the last 24 hours, one border with Afghanistan was already, we're dealing with those consequences. Another border with India is a nuclear fault line, and our border with Iran is now under stress, to say lightly. In that context, there's a false sense of calm that has prevailed that now that we've received a ceasefire, it must mean that we've achieved a peace. We're further than that peace than we should be. And I believe that the European Union is very well placed to make the case for the respect for international law, to make the case for the non-weaponization of water, and to continue to make the case for dialogue and diplomacy is the only path to peace. I'm very sorry that I personally have to run, but I'm leaving my very, very able team behind to answer the rest of your questions. Thank you.
So I'd like to answer your question about the deserts and the forests and the issues related to issues. So we have, as the starting point, not at the tactical level, but at the strategic level, we have said that whatever standards hold in Europe, we'd like to have the same standards for GMOs. So we're not